Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tiger Tank 12, however you want to call me. I don't really care. And today we are looking at some new information Wargaming have just posted, or actually a few days ago, about the up and coming Polish tech tree. Now we know that the Polish tech tree is going to be the second nation added in 2018, and probably the last nation for a while. And it's going to be a very interesting line because Polish tanks are a rarity. And to understand why Polish tanks are a rarity, you have to make kind of an excerpt into history. And that actually makes it very easy to see why Polish tanks aren't as um, as common as German tanks or Russian tanks. So basically, we're not going to read through all of this. We're going to take a look at some of the tanks. We're going to talk about some of the characteristics that they'll be adding. And we're going to be talking about the history of Polish tank design. So basically what they are saying right here is that since 2009, since the early alpha stage of 2009, they have added 11 nations to the game. And each one of those nations has kind of a very special vehicle. Germany with the Tiger, the United States with the M4 Sherman or with the Pershing, the British obviously with the Cromwell or the Conqueror. And each one of these nations has a tank that kind of represents the nation. Now, with the Polish tech tree, they're saying it's very difficult because some of these vehicles have never been produced, or actually were only blueprints. Like, I don't know, about 50%, 60% of the tanks and wolf tanks are basically just blueprints and constructed by Wargaming themselves through the archives, through the general specs that they get. They don't know if the vehicles ever would have, behaved like that because the tanks were never built. But basically, they do have the raw data. Now, with the Polish tech tree, the problem that they had was now they don't want to put in more Soviet copies into the game because obviously because of the history that Poland had or still has, the tanks that came after 1945 would be mainly copies of Soviet vehicles because obviously Poland was a Soviet satellite state. So before we get into all of these vehicles, I'd say we take a short excerpt into the Polish history. We're not going to be very detailed. We're not going to go into any specific dates, but we're going to take a grand look at things, how Poland as a nation has basically started in the 20th century. So what you have to know is that Poland during the medieval ages or medieval times, we're only talking about Europe, was actually a powerhouse of Eastern Europe and a very big combatant, of basically any other nation. The Polish or the Polish, yeah, the Polish were very, very respected and very, very Christian, just like any other nation back in the days in Western Europe. And basically, what happened in the 18th or 19th century, I'm not entirely sure, was that when Russia expanded its territory, they actually came face to face with the Polish Empire and they won that war. Basically, the Soviet, not the Soviets, excuse me, that's way later. The Russian Empire occupied the Polish territories and thus the Polish state ended to exist, the Polish Empire. That is until the end of World War One. During World War One, obviously, the Triple Entente and the Axis in the middle, they fought a big bitter war, while the Western War was actually a war of trench warfare. The Eastern War was actually one of movement. And after they signed the peace treaties at Versailles and the peace treaty that the Germans and the Russians or the Soviets then did, like on a different note, Poland actually was established. And Poland as a nation, as a new nation, is rather young. It was established after the First World War, and obviously it was established in former Soviet or Russian territories and former German territories or Austrian-Hungarian territories that used to be one big nation and now consists of like, I don't even know, like 10 different nations. So what happened is that Poland, when it came back, was surrounded by nations that maybe were not that favored towards Poland, because obviously it was their former territory and Poland didn't exist for over 100 years to that point. So what happened was that the Polish obviously had to strengthen their armies to protect themselves, because they were kind of they were in a very awkward position in between Soviet Russia and and Germany, and afterwards, like, you know, the Weimar Republic, and then all of a sudden the Third Reich with Adolf Hitler. And that was kind of a difficult call for the Polish, because they knew that a conflict between Germany or the Third Reich was probably inevitable. So what they did was they started going after their military projects, and tanks were also one of those things. And the Polish actually had one of the most sophisticated um, armored column back in the days, at least in the 30s, um, as the French did. And basically, that's where they started to get, that was the pinnacle of their tank design. But obviously, 1939, they were rolled by the Germans, and then afterwards also the Soviets, and that's where their tank design phase ended. And after that, obviously, after 1945, they became a Soviet satellite state where they had Soviet tanks or Soviet tank designs that they would produce on license for their armed forces, and thus the Polish tank design didn't really go into any in-depth own designs as they would have if they would have been an independent nation. Now, Poland has recently just uh, revealed one of the new tanks that they've been working on. It's a very interesting design. I do I will post a link in the description to an article about that tank. I just forgot its name, but it's a very interesting design. It looks very futuristic, and it has active digital camouflage and all that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting to see how tank designs have changed in the last 50 years or 100 years since tanks have been on the battlefield. So without further ado, I say this is a very long introduction. We go right into the tanks that they're going to be adding, because this is the main idea behind this. So first and foremost, all of these vehicles are subject to change, and they will be updated eventually by wargaming. So what we're looking at right here is the low tiers. And the first tank we are going to be looking at is going to be the 4TP. And what this 4TP is, it's basically a very close vehicle to the Vickers Cardin Lloyd, a British tank. And it is actually a vehicle that is fast and has a bit more alpha damage than the other ones. Unfortunately, I can't click on the picture. What the hell is going on? Now, this is just weird. So whatever, we're moving on. The tier 2 version is going to be the 7TP. It is also based upon a British tank, and this vehicle was produced during or before World War One. And they don't really give us that much information about these tanks, but I think they're going to be similar to light tier, early tier tanks. Not a lot of armor, decent armament, you know, that will go through anything at tier 1 and 2 and 3 possibly. And I think decent mobility. At least the first tank is going to have very decent mobility. And then we're moving on to tiers 3 and 4. Now, tiers 3 and 4 are the T10P and the 14TP. And they're very similar, at least in looks, if we take a look at both these pictures. And basically, I'd say they are very similar. They have very similar characteristics as well. So these tanks were actually in the development stage when World War II broke out, but they did stop it once the war actually arrived in Poland, and which was 1939, the very first country that, or the second country that the Germans actually did occupy, if you count the Czechoslovakian Republic right there. Well, it was the Republic, Czechoslovakia, where they actually took a bit of their country away in 1938 and actually got to keep it. So what is going to be a more interesting is going to be tier 5. This is where they are going to be introducing the KSUST 1 or 2, marking a transition to heavy duty to top tiers. The mid tiers are especially diverse from a gameplay perspective, introducing a whole set of combat roles and behavior. You'll start with light, medium, hybrid, going through to a medium tank that really wants to act like a big boy, and finally evolving into a pure heavy tank. Tier 5 is occupied by the KSUST 1, a tank concept developed within a tendering process launched in 1937. One of the most demanded models, the T20/25TP, has been long awaited by the Polish community, so we're happy to introduce it as part of the upcoming line. In terms of specs, the model evolves the trend started by the low tiers, featuring a 75mm gun with 140 HP alpha. That is actually pretty impressive for a 75mm gun. An impressive number compared to an average of 115 hit points seen in tier 5 medium tanks. So it looks like it is going to be a rather large medium tank. It's just as they say, like the start of of these hybrid tanks. It looks really interesting because it looks kind of awkward shaped. It has a rounded turret. It's basically, I think, the main idea about this tank is basically the gun. It's all about the armament on this one. 75mm gun with 140 HP alpha damage. That's very impressive. But we're gonna see what the statistics will be once once they actually will be released to the test server, and then we can give out more information. So as we march towards tier 6 and 7, two incarnations of a concept by Edward Habig come to life. A talented Polish engineer, he blended the most successful ideas from contemporary German and Soviet design. The Eastern influence has resulted in sloped armor plates, whereas the Western approach brought in compact turrets and high firepower. The latter will become the signature feature of both models. You can see the Tier 6 Alpha to be around a massive 220 to 240 points. Well, that's certainly impressive. Now, if we take a look at this 40TP Habicha, this is basically the first tank where they aren't really looking into production line, because it's just a vehicle that was a concept by Edward Habig, and this is basically where the entire line starts to deviate from at least a little bit of a historical accuracy to a lot of fantasy and blueprints and just concept. So it gives a lot of free space to wargaming to actually balance these tanks, but at the same time, it's a bit difficult to say that this is a good way to handle some things, because I think I need a bit of historical accuracy to it. But looking at other tanks in the game, the Waffenträger E100 or any other tank, the E100 actually they built the hull, they never built the turret. But some vehicles never really existed, or most of them never really existed, and I think that's just part of the game. It's supposed to be a fun game, arcade game. I think every tank they add, at least, it does kind of fit into the game. Some tanks fit in more, some tanks fit in less, but yeah, I think it's sad a bit to see that they have less information, obviously. But the Polish tech tree, I mean, I can see it's difficult for them to get more information out of them, because obviously 1939 is the occupation of Poland up until the end of 1989, when they started to release their grip of the Soviet satellite states. So yeah, basically wargaming don't really have that much of a leeway to actually get more information out of this. So as Habig developed only one tank concept, we didn't have a ready-to-go solution for what to put on tier 7. So we took one step further and modeled the possible development of the engineer's idea. Historically, Polish tanks had tendencies to grow bigger, inclined towards heavy machines. For this reason, tier 7 welcomes a heavier, mightier version of the tank. depicting our version of what Habik's tank MK2 might have become. With its heavy tank status, the machine will get a 105mm gun with 300 to 320 points of alpha, but its weaker armor means you'll have to play it cautiously in battle. So basically, starting from here, it's a lot of free interpretation, as they're saying. Basically, that's exactly what they're saying right here. They don't have enough information, and this is going to be the 45 TP. Abika is going to be based on loose information and own ideas on how the tank line would go. I think if they manage to get it all done in a correct fashion, it's going to work out. I think some of the people, obviously, who are very interested in historical accuracy are going to be a little bit disappointed, but that's the way it is. I think if you really want to have historical accuracy like a tier 8 for a lot of nations, it's over. There's no other tank that really was designed, but like for some very rare occurrences like the British Conqueror or the M103, which were actually built and actually were serviced. So going over to the top tiers, we're going to look at the tier 8. That's, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. The Cholg Markov Sievgo. So as we mentioned in a previous article, the post-War II, World War II Polish tank fleet included nothing but Soviet vehicles or their modified versions. But we had no intentions of rehashing old models. Instead, our goal was to make an unconventional set of top-tier machines. After a quick dig in the archives, we uncovered 3 thesis projects by graduate engineers of the time, works that could have gone to production, shaping a different look of the Polish vehicles. While the notes we came across didn't have any titles for the concept, we got a little creative and named the tank after their authors. So the tank is named after the guy who actually wrote these papers, which went into the archives. And sitting on tier 8, the Cholg Markovsievko is a relatively heavy but bulky vehicle. Its speed maxing out at mediocre 25 kilometers per hour. We'll be testing a wide range of gun modifications for this model, starting with a traditional 105mm, 122mm barrels, and ending with a never before seen 120mm HE gun. Wow, great. More high explosive. Armor wise, this tank will likely receive a robust turret mounted on a weaker hull, which will eventually define its playstyle. So, from the pictures, it's very interesting looking. We're just going to refresh this real fast, this page, so we can actually look at the... Why can't I just click on the picture and look at the picture? But it doesn't really matter. It looks really interesting. The turret reminds me of an IS-3 stock turret. The hull reminds me, on the other hand, of a... not really a heavy tank, but actually the 110, the Chinese heavy tank. At least the rear part, when you look at it from behind, obviously the frontal part isn't really that much. Like, it seems more Soviet. But moving on to the tier 9 version, we have the oh god, I'm not even gonna pronounce this. Chiskievskisa. Oh my god, the proud carrier of a 130mm gun with an alpha reaching 400 to 560 HP. Its impressive destructive power, great overall armor, and low speed will become the tank's main feature. So basically, the main idea behind the Soviet tech tree is, the Polish tech tree, excuse me, is adding higher alpha damage to all of their guns and giving them, in some cases, very good armor or no armor at all in favor of very impressive guns. So we're gonna see how it plays out. This does seem to look like a STI, at least in my sense, which will hit even harder. Like 490 to 560 HP, that is very impressive. But it's a 130mm gun, so basically it's the same alpha as the IS-7, I'd say. And it's just at tier 9. I mean, this is really interesting. Crowning the tech tree will be the Lewandowskiego, the ultimate embodiment of the concept proposed in Polish top tiers. In terms of size and even looks, it's comparable to its Soviet counterparts. 2 guns options are currently in the mix, including 130mm and 152 caliber. The latter being the favorite. Its firepower will enable you to shave off 750 HP from your enemy, but the penetration values will skirt 250mm. Gameplay wise, it stands somewhere between the IS-4 and E-100, just like those two tanks. The tank will have low mobility while bordering the Germans' durability and firepower, coupled with the Soviets' shape and size. What you will have as a result is a heavily armored, low-speed damage dealer to crush enemy defenses. But what will really make this machine stand out is the gun depression that will reach as much as 8 degrees, making a decent impact on the tank. Gameplay diversity. Oh god, it looks it. This tank almost screams Object 705A. Um, the turret is actually not that far in the back, but it looks a lot like it. The armor looks really, really weird. And it looks really, really powerful. But that's all the information we have. I'm not sure how this is going to end up. I'm going to be excited. I'm always excited for new content. I hope that they don't completely overstep it like the Object 268 version 4. If they do it like in a correct way, I think we're gonna have a very nice, enjoyable new line that we can grind with vehicles that are basically made up, or a lot of them are made up, and vehicles that were planned in production. I think the what I'm most interested about is the the tier 7 version with 300 and 320 alpha damage, and I think the tier 6, tier 5 and tier 6. I think the mid tiers is going to be very interesting with the high alpha in those mid tier battles. Those vehicles will probably have a very interesting impact in the game. Yeah. Um, it was a bit of a longer video with a bit of a lot of sideway looking. I hope you still enjoyed this video. If you did, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.